everybody. Today is the class that I love and most students hate, okay? And I have to tell you that I've been teaching a one-credit class this last 5 weeks for social science students, and on our last 2 classes we spent on citation. And they just fought and fought and fought doing it, okay? And we finally, all of us together, finally came to the conclusion that the problem is, there are a couple problems. One is that you wait till the last minute to do it. And at that point, you are sick of the project and sick of the paper, and you just want to get it done, right? Have you been there?
Right.
Right. Are you there now?
Right.
No, you don't have to answer. It's okay. It's okay. So that's one thing, okay? And the second thing is that you don't see a need for it. You don't understand why you have to go through this, jump through these hoops, right? You're thinking, I'm just writing this paper, can't Dr. Humphreys just read it and it's good? So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about why it's important, and then about what I think, and you'll have to decide for yourself what I think might help in terms of getting it done. You all have an agronomy journal, okay, in your hands. Do you want one, Michael? Sure. Maybe you know somebody in this issue. You are using, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not awake, I guess, and I've already had coffee. So. You are using, for this project, the agronomy citation style, okay? It's the style that Dr. Humphreys has chosen for this class and for agriculture students to learn. There are, how many of you had English 1010 or in English 1010? Anybody? Okay. Do you remember what style you used there when you were citing things?
It was like, we did online.
No, what kind of, yeah, you cited all kinds of sources, but what style guide did you use? Nope, probably MLA, okay? There's MLA, APA, Chicago, agronomy, there's an ag, there are 200 different styles in English, okay? This is the one that you're going to use. My best advice to you is, when you're working on this project, don't think about other things you learned. Put it out of your mind, okay? Because if you try to mix them, you just get in trouble. So, what does it mean to cite something in a style? If you will all open your agronomy journal and go to the very first article, you're going to see some pages with advertisements and the table of contents, but then you're going to get to, and I see you have something that's called forum. Move. Well, I guess that one will work. That will be okay. You're going to find something that has a title, okay? Mine says green manure as nitrogen source for sweet corn in a warm temperate environment. So does everybody have a page that has a long title? Okay? Here, you can start here if you want. Here you go. Okay? Yeah. Okay. We looked at some of these online when we were doing research earlier in this semester, and I hope some of you have at least identified some online journal articles. Agronomy journal is published in both paper and online. If you notice the date of your journal, you'll see it's a 2006. Northwest College doesn't have it in paper anymore. We have it online. But I thought it'd be easier, since we're not in a lab, for everybody to look at a paper issue. This is the title of the article, the authors, okay? Go down to the first paragraph. I think this will work for everybody. You may have to go to the second paragraph and identify a place where you have a parens, what looks like a person's last name and a date. Okay, mine says Carlisle et al. 1988. It's in parens. Can you all identify one of those? Anybody not find one? You haven't found one yet?
I have quite a few of them.
Yeah, just pick one of those. You can use the first one. Has everybody found one? Okay, what is that telling you? What does that mean? Do you just skip over that part? Excuse me? Where the information information came from. That's right, the authors of my article, Scher, Scholberg, and McSorley, are citing somebody named Carlyle. And it was written in 1988. Okay? Now, what do I do next? Do I just keep reading? Oh, you could. I want you to, everybody take the name that's in parentheses. Go to the end of the article. Okay? You may have to go several pages till you find the references list. Okay? And then find your name in that list. Can you do that? Everybody found it? Okay. Mine says Carlyle and 6 or 7 other people, 1988, and then it gives me a citation for a research report from the Florida Agricultural Institute for Food Agriculture Society, I'm guessing at the University of Florida. That is a citation, okay? The person who was writing it was writing something. They put a little note in parentheses to say who the author was and the date. And then at the end, they have a reference list, okay? That is what you're going to do, all right? Now, how was the reference list organized? Alphabetically. Why was it organized that way? Easier to find. That's the only reason. Okay, there's not some mumbo-jumbo secret society thing going on here. When you do your reference list, you need to put it in alphabetical order so that whoever's reading your paper can find your citation. Okay? So you will have, for every place in your paper that you use someone else's ideas, you will have parentheses at the end of the sentence, an author's name, and a date. Okay? Sometimes that author's name will be an organization. It doesn't have to be a person's last name. Most of the time it will be. But sometimes if you're using a website, it might be an organization. That's what you're doing. You're putting these little notes in the text, and then you will build this reference list at the end. Okay? My best strategy to you is, while you're writing the paper, put those little notes in. And at the end of your paper, make a page that says references and put some kind of note. You don't have to do the whole citation at that point. I never do. I just make those notes, and I don't worry about getting them in alphabetical order. I just put Carlyle, Humphreys, Richards, Smith, just put them on that page. And then when I'm done writing the paper, I go back and finish the citations. That way you are covering yourself for using other people's ideas, and it's much easier to build the reference list, okay? But you have to have the notes in the text, like these, okay? And then the reference list at the end. All right? Now, somebody said, I think you said, didn't you? I just keep reading. Okay, when you see that. Sometimes I do too. Sometimes it's not important to look at the reference, but sometimes when you're reading something, you'll say, oh, that's kind of interesting. I wonder where that came from. Or I want to look at that reference list. Now, you may not be at that point as a student in agroecology, but if you intend to stay at Northwest and do a capstone, that's the kind of thing you want to do. You want to follow those reference links because you could read that article and use it for your paper. So understanding what that gobbledygook is in the text, I think, is really important. Okay? And that's why you're doing it. It's not because Professor Humphreys just made this up because he wants to make life difficult for you. Okay? It's an important part of transmitting information. Okay? All right, now we're going to look at the style itself. Okay? It has some components to it. The first thing I want to point out to you is on the LibGuide, there's this link for citing your sources. Oh, that part doesn't work for me. Okay? it tells you, it'll review a little bit of what we are going to talk about today, in case you forget. But there are some links here. This is to the full citation guide. This is only one chapter, okay? This is to the full citation guide on the internet, okay? So if you have a question, you can get to it. This is a sample list of references. So what this is, and actually some of them are in the PowerPoint, this is how your reference list would look. Okay, so if you're wondering, here's the references, and you can see they're all in alphabetical order. And here's one, CAB International and FAO Stat. Those aren't people, right? But my paper would say CAB International 2008 in parentheses in the paper if I use something from there. So there's an example of a citation of a reference list. Oops. And there's also a list of, there's a worksheet that I'm going to pass out a copy of that will help you build citations if you can't figure out what the elements are. Those are all there for you to get to, okay? And I have typically sent the PowerPoint to Professor Humphreys, and he's put it on your class page, and I'll do that at the end of class. So these examples will be here too. The only thing I'm going to pass out today is a copy of the worksheet. All the other stuff is just going to be on the LibGuide, okay? Okay. So why do we do this? Okay. This is the first reason. That's what we just talked about. So others can locate where I found my research. That's what you're doing. Okay? Giving credit to other people. At this point, you're probably thinking, and it doesn't really matter, but someday I hope some of you will write stuff or do work in agriculture and want to publish your results, and you want other people to give you credit for what you've done. So that's what this is. People don't get paid. The people that write in this journal, and Professor Humphreys, when he publishes things, he doesn't get paid, okay?
You have to actually pay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in some disciplines you actually have to pay to get your work published. In my discipline in history you don't have to pay, but you certainly don't get paid, but you have to pay in agriculture. Is that uniformly true, or just by journal?
It's usually by journal, but I know most of the ones that are in ag.
First of all, you have to convince them that they want what you're writing. I mean, you just don't send a check in your paper and they print it. It's got to be good, okay, first of all, and then you have to pay. So they're not getting paid. The best you can do is cite them or use them. I mean, if you're using some of this stuff in class, that's the best thing a researcher can have happen to a researcher. Somebody read it, somebody's using it, and if a student's using it, that's really cool, isn't it? Yeah. Okay? And then there's this whole plagiarism thing. You know, you don't steal other people's ideas. It's unethical. And at least at Northwest, if you do, you can fail the class. Okay? So you want to keep that in mind. And then the last one, which is sometimes the most compelling one, but I hazard to say it's not the most important one, is that the instructor wants you to do it. Okay? All right, there are two elements. We talked about this. What does that mean? I hate it. A malware infection. I thought we were all totally protected. We talked about this. This is what's in the paper, the author's name and the date. Okay? And then it's at the end. Here's the ending one. You have to have both. Don't put one of those little things in the text and then not list it at the end. Doesn't help anybody. However, if I cite this paper several times, okay, I don't have to put it several times at the end, just once. Okay, so I can use GERD several times in my paper, but I only have to build one citation at the end.
So in our paper, do you just put the last name then, or do we have to put the name and the date?
You have to have this, well, just what I showed you before. Let's go back. You have to have the name. In this case, this means that there are more than 6 authors, and we'll talk about that. But there are more than 6 authors to this study and the date. You have to have both. Because it's conceivable that if you're in a field where somebody's really famous, you could have several articles by the same author. So the date distinguishes between them. This is not an agriculture example, but if you were writing an English paper and you were using Shakespeare, and you could be citing Shakespeare all over the place, and you've got to distinguish somehow. So you have both pieces, okay? And remember, the references are alphabetical. I think that's something students often don't do, is that right? Okay. Now, this one is a little different, okay? I actually use the author's name in my writing, and you can do that. It just depends on what style you want to do, according to FAO stat, or according to Professor so-and-so, or according to this. If you use their name in the sentence, then all you need is the date in parentheses, okay? And then if you're quoting anything, sometimes people want to quote the whole thing, then you have to have the page number. If there is a page number. Now, if you're using a website, there's no page number, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay? Remember, you have to cite things even if you're not quoting. If it's someone else's idea and you're changing the wording, which is often a good idea in writing, don't fill your paper with hundreds of quotes, you still have to give that person credit for their original idea or their research results. Okay? And then here's that thing again. Just some tips. We'll talk about the exceptions. There are 3 times when you don't have to have something in a reference list at the end. Okay? Be consistent. Don't mix style guides, and consult the style guide. Don't wing it. Okay, I have, on an average week, the librarians, we probably deal with 4 or 5 different style guides with students. We never wing it. Even though I know I have a pretty good command of some things, I always go to the style guide because it's too easy to confuse things. Okay? Here's a book, and we're going to go through these pretty quickly, but just to point out some things. This is the author of the book, Fultz, and the date, okay? And then here's the one thing about agronomy. It's always initials. It's not the person's first name and middle name written out. So even if the article or the website or the book or the conference proceeding carries their whole name, you change it to initials. I think that's actually a space-saving effort, is why I think they do that. The other thing they do that is kind of hard to get used to is there's a capitalization scheme for titles. The first word is capitalized, and if it's a proper name, but none of these other words are capitalized. Okay, it looks funny because we're used to capitalizing all the proper words, all the words except for and the and for, but you don't capitalize any of that. Just the first word, and if you've got a state or a city or a person's name. Okay? There are no italics, no underlining. They even got rid of that little in italics thing. It's gone. So there's no italics or underlining at all, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, here's a periodical in a database, okay? And you don't have to identify where it came from. If you use a paper article that Professor Humphreys gave you, if you use an article from a library database, if it's a published work in article length, this is what it looks like. It's just the author's date, title of the article, an abbreviation for where it came from. This is Food Reviews International, but it could be Agronomy Journal, or this is the volume and the page numbers. Now, everybody pick up their Agronomy Journal, okay? On the front, says volume 98, number 5. Mine does. What does everybody else? Does everybody have volume 98? Anybody have? Okay. You have a different volume, but you have a different issue, right? That's what this is. This is the volume. You need that. Okay? You don't need the issue number. And they appear all over the place. Even on, if you pick up get a journal article off of a website, if you went to Agronomy Journal through our library, you would actually go to their website because we now pay for it through their website. You have to find that volume number somewhere, okay? And then these are the pages. The other thing is about authors. You're going to find some things with lots of authors. Last name, comma, first initial of the first author. And then everybody else is in first initial, last name. It's not inverted like the very first one, okay? That's a little unusual. Sometimes it's the other way around, but this is the only one where the last name is first.
And that doesn't have to be alphabetical?
No, it has to be the way they're listed on the item. In fact, that's very important.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It is a good question. I'll tell you a little story. This is not in order haphazardly, okay? This is in order by the importance of the person who's involved in this. I'm going to guess. I may not be right. This is probably the lead researcher. These are the graduate student flunkies, right? Or people who are lower down in the academic rank. It's very important. I published an article once with another person, and we flipped a coin to see who was going to be first. And the reason it's important is because this is the name that gets associated with the work, the first one usually. So yeah, however it's listed on the item is the way you list it. It's just one of those weird academic things. Okay. Sometimes you take a chapter out of something. You don't read the whole thing. You might have a chapter in a book. There's a way to do that. This has 2 authors. Reese and Galway, 1989. That's in text. Okay, you can see that. This is the title of the section of the work. So they wrote this thing on Chenopodium grains of the Andes, a crop for temperate latitudes. And then this says it's in Wickens et al., New Crops for the Food and Industry, Chapman and Hall. Okay? And then these are the page numbers that it's in. So if you use a section of something, you can denote that. We'll see this again with websites. It's similar if you're using part of a website. Okay, here's an internet document. Nelson was the author, okay? 1991. The section I'm using is on quinoa. Specialty Crops Information Sheet is the larger work. It's a periodical that appears online. This is the publisher, Washington State University Extension Service. This is their location, Island County, Hoopleville, Washington. The URL, and then when I found it. Little tip, don't make all these access dates the night before the paper. Okay? Same sort of idea. You're taking a section of a larger work. This is very similar to a periodical, but it was just something I found on the internet. Here's another internet document, and I'm guessing many of you may have this. Use FAO. We looked at that, if you remember, for statistics. They're the author, because no one name is associated with it. This is the section, Top Production Brazil 2008, that I'm using. FAO is the publisher, Rome, Italy, and this is the URL, and when I found it. Okay? And in the case of something like this, you don't have to do the URL to the exact document. You can use the main URL because it's very easy when you get to that website to get to it. If it's something that's you think is very difficult for people to get to, give them the full URL because then they can get right to it. Okay, did anybody use conference proceedings? Did anybody find anything that was delivered at a conference? Because some of them appear on the web, some of them appear in published form through the databases. Okay. Just to give you a heads up about this, it may happen when you're doing other research. There's this whole class of information called conference proceedings. What happens is Professor Humphreys goes to an agriculture conference and he gives a paper, okay? It's not published yet in a journal, but he delivers it at a conference. And sometimes all those papers for that conference are put together in what's called conference proceedings. And they appear. They're not often as highly regarded as journal articles because they haven't been reviewed with the same rigor, but sometimes it's the only place you can find information because somebody will give a paper on a project and then they choose to never publish it. So there's a way to cite those. So just keep that in mind if you ever run onto them, that they're a good source of information for projects. Okay, there are 3 times that you do not have to make a reference list at the end. There are only 3. Every other time, if you're using somebody else's information, you need to have them in the reference list. But if you're using an interview, if you've interviewed somebody, this is what it looks like in your paper. First name, first initial, middle initial. If you know, I mean, you don't have to ask people for their middle initials. Their last name. It's called a personal communication, and you have a date. Now, if you talk to a person more than once, you may want to include more of the date than the year, okay? It just depends on how many times you've talked to them and if you think that's important. The reason for this is nobody can recreate this. I mean, I can't go and find this interview anywhere. You had the interview, but you need to do that. And if it's an email exchange, it should still be a personal communication. That's how they denote it, unless you want it noted differently.
No, that's fine.
Okay. You've actually talked to the person in some way, okay? Another time you do not have to do this is if you're using unpublished data. Is anybody doing that you know of, Micah?
No.
Okay. People use other people's data sometimes that's not published. Say, I did an experiment on quinoa and Professor Humphreys wanted to use it as an example of an experiment that you could do in a class in a paper that he was writing. My data hasn't been published anywhere, he just borrowed it. That's what this means, okay? And it can't be recreated because I gave it to him. So if you're using unpublished data, if somebody gives you some information, say you went to an implement dealer and they gave you some information, some data that they had on, repairs of tractors, and it was their data that they collected, this is how you would cite it. Because it's not your data, it's theirs. You need to give them credit. But that doesn't go at the end either. And then the last one, and we had this last year, I believe. Was it in this class or in a?
I think so.
We have had students who want to cite a religious text as an example of something. I think somebody was doing something on grapes. Is that right? Yes, and they were using the Bible. If it's a classical text, like a Bible or the Quran, there's a whole group of things that are considered classic texts, and if you're unsure about that, Professor Humphreys can work with you. But this is how you cite it. You have the book, because we all know what this means. This is in Leviticus 3, verse 12, okay? But then you have to say what version of the Bible you're using. And you don't have to put that at the end either, because I could just go and look this up. That's not hard for me to do. So I didn't put these in, if you're using a definition from somewhere, you have to cite that and you will have to put the citation at the end, like the dictionary or an encyclopedia or something like that, or a glossary from somewhere. And if you don't know how to do that, I can help you or Professor Humphreys can help you Okay? Now we have the author thing, which is really nagging, I think. I'm going to pass these out. This is a worksheet for you to have that you can work with if you find it. But if you flip it over on the back, this author thing is written out. And this is just arbitrary as far as I can tell. They just decided on a number, because every style guide decides on a different number. For instance, in English, oh, did I give you an extra one? In English, people never write with anybody else. They write all by themselves, so they don't really care about this multiple author thing. But agriculture people and scientists, you've probably seen, you asked that question, there are lots of authors to things, right? Well, they work in teams, they have assistants, they do research. Sometimes researchers are scattered all over the world. In fact, that's much more common now because trading information is so much easier. So they had to come up with a way to give people credit and how to do it. So if you have two authors in the text and in the reference list, and this is on the back of this sheet, so you won't have to write it down. You have to list both of them, okay? And so I've listed what it would look like in references and what it would look like at the end, in text, excuse me. If you have three or more in the text, use this et al. Thing. It's a Latin abbreviation for and everybody else, okay? In the reference list, all three of those people get credit, okay? So from 3 to 6, you're going to list them all at the end in the reference list. If you have more than 6, it's always et al. So it's just a matter of counting. Just count them up and make a decision. Okay? And I'm guessing some of you have articles that are written by more than 6 people, because it's pretty common. Now, if Professor Humphreys is in one of those, make sure you list his name. Okay. This sheet is a worksheet so that if you haven't been able to figure out how to do something, it's just a matter of writing it in. And a lot of students just use it as a template and sit and type it, because it'll say author, period, date. It just walks you through the process, okay, for each kind of thing. A book, a periodical, article, internet document. Oh, we should talk about DOIs. Let me go back and show you an example of that. Because some of you may have found these. I don't know if I have. I do not. There is in this one. Okay. This one right here, it's going to be hard to see, but you'll see this little DOI colon and this long gobbledygook thing. Some of you may probably have encountered those. Those appear on web versions of periodical articles. And sometimes if you're just searching the internet, it'll have a DOI listed somewhere. Sometimes in a database it will list a DOI. The DOI stands for Document Object Identifier. It's a number that they've constructed so that you can use that number to get to the document on the internet. You can type it in and it will take you to the document. It's basically a substitution for a URL. And it's a better substitution because it's a permanent number, so that if that document gets moved from a website to another website, the DOI will stay the same. So it's like a permanent phone number, okay? If it doesn't have one of those, then you've got to use the URL if it's an online document that's not part of the library database. Now, the ones in library databases are fine because they've been published in both paper and hard copy, and they can be found anywhere, okay? They may be on a website, they may be in a database, they may be on the shelf in a library. But web documents are tricky because they can be moved all over, people can change the content, and that's why you have to give a little more documentation. Questions? sources do people have that they're gonna have to cite? Does everybody have the FAO stat website, okay? There's an example on this list, okay? You'll have to substitute your own information. By the way, these little things in brackets, you do not have to identify what kind of a document you have. That's me just helping you out. So just ignore those bold things in brackets on here. FAO stats, people have websites, I assume. People have interviews. People talk to people, anybody? Via email or any other way, okay. Articles for people, and you should be able to find some of those. I think they have to have some of those, don't
It's pretty generic.
Okay.
4 references,
they?
5
Okay.
references.
I would recommend that you, if you're using websites, that you not have a whole bunch of .com websites. I don't think that's going to look very good. And if you're using websites, make sure that you're not using just a blog. I mean, there are lots of those out there. You want something where somebody's documented what they're doing. That's the whole point of this, okay?
You know, one thing that I discovered as I was doing some other looking around was YouTube as a one of the struggles that students have is I'm doing rice production in the United States and Indonesia, but I can't find a lot of information about like how they produce rice in
Right.
Indonesia.
Yeah.
And I stumbled on a YouTube video that was produced by I can't remember who it was, but it was really eye-opening, and it went through kind of a day and a production procedure for rice in Indonesia, and it gave you kind of a snapshot of what that looked like. I think in terms of these papers, I would welcome videos that students have seen being able to be cited.
Okay, I can do that, because we have a YouTube citation for MLA and APA. We
Okay.
just have to construct it.
Okay.
The other thing is I haven't looked at that Films on Demand.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
YouTube, and then there's a database on the library website under the A to Z list called Films on Demand. And you might look up there because there are video clips basically.
Yeah.
And I haven't looked there for agriculture. I don't know. I know there's some agriculture stuff, but I don't know.
For now, it would be safe. I mean, it would be safe to cite it as an internet document.
Yeah, but you don't have. There's some pieces you don't, and there's some
Yeah.
other pieces I know with YouTube videos that are kind of hard to find. So
Yeah.
I'll look at it and
Okay.
send you something if it looks different, so
Could
we
we
can get it on there.
use that in our presentation?
A YouTube video? Short piece of it, because you only have 5 or 7 minutes to do a presentation. So.
Okay.
The other thing you need to be careful with YouTube videos is, and that's one of the pieces that people don't do, and you indicated, you have to look and see who produced it, okay? Because honestly, I think YouTube is wonderful, but it's also very scary because people put a lot of doctored stuff up there. I mean, you know, when they pass all that stuff that goes viral, all these weird animals doing weird things, some of that's just not true. Okay, and so you want to look and see who produced it. If it's an institute or an agricultural
Governmental entity. or
yeah,
something.
somebody like that, a governmental entity, then you know it's up there not because they're trying to fool people. But if it's Joe Schmo's video on, you know, growing grapes and he's doing a bunch of really weird things, you should probably not use it. But you do have to look at those YouTube videos. There's a place, I think it's on the right. The video appears over here, and on the right there's some information, and it will tell you who the producer is. So pay attention to that when you're looking at it. Okay? But you do have to give them credit. Okay? Just because it's a video, and it's the same way with images for your presentation, you have to cite the images. Even if you're just searching Google and you find this really cool image of quinoa growing in the Andes, it's not a Google image. Okay, Google is the vehicle you're using to find it. And they call them Google images. Well, it's not. Okay, Google did not create those images. Okay, some other person took that photograph, created that image, and you need, when you click on it, you need to look at the URL and go to the website to see who did it. There's a big controversy going on now with photographers because photographers have posted things on the internet, they want to get their images out, and people are stealing them, and you know, just because it's an image doesn't mean somebody didn't put a great deal of effort into it. I tell students the only image you probably do not have to cite are those little clip art things that appear in Microsoft. Okay?
Yeah, so if you have an image, especially if that image is a table or a graph of something that you're trying to represent, corn production in China over the past 60 years, that image needs to be referenced in the text, see figure number whatever, because it shows you whatever. And then you need to have a citation that says figure 1, corn production in United States versus China.
And those appear, what you're doing is taking a piece of something else. An image is a piece of a larger work. So it's going to be like a section of a website or a chapter in a book or something like that, a piece out of something larger. They're not Google images. Don't let Google convince you that they are. Some hardworking agriculture research assistant was out there taking pictures and they posted them on the internet. So the best thing you can do is give other people credit for what they've done, because someday it will happen to you. I guarantee you. You'll do something and you'll want people to recognize that you did it.
To know, one more thing, and there was a note on the presentation, was being consistent. I probably won't go through the references and say, oh, they capitalized the wrong word.
No.
Probably won't do that. But what I'm looking for is just, you're consistent. It's in alphabetical order, it's all the same font, it looks uniform,
You did the author's names right,
Yeah.
you know.
that kind of stuff.
We didn't talk about this. This is called a hanging indentation, okay? You have to do this. This is hard to do in Word, okay? It is a pain in the butt to do in Word. And I'm not a Word expert. I'll tell you how I do it. I go over here and create a hard return, and then I boot the other part over, okay? Because if you try to do a hanging indentation, it pushes the whole thing over. You're shaking your head. It's ugly. And it used to be easy. It used to be really easy to just copy it and use their little, but they all need to be like that if they're more than one sentence. And he'll look for that. I mean, that would be a kind of an obvious thing. And if you've left out, I mean, if you have FAO stats and the URL, you need to give more information. URLs are actually the most useless part of the citation. Even YouTube things. I mean, sure, it connects you to it, but what if somebody reads this in 3 months and the video, I mean, YouTube videos go up and down. People put them on, they take them off. Same way with all this website stuff. And so I have a URL, I can't find it, but if I have the author and the title and I know who produced it, chances are I can find it through a Google search and get to it wherever it's moved. So people think they're easy, and they work in a quick moment, but for long-term stuff, they're just useless. I asked our webmaster, I actually asked one of the librarians, and the college's website, since they made it, the URLs for the website have changed something like 5 times. Okay? And we're a pretty stable organization. So, if you can't figure out a piece of a citation, I'm happy to help you look, but I'm not going to do it all for you. I mean, you have to give it a good faith effort, but if you're looking at a website and you can't figure out what you have, I'm happy to help you try to figure it out. Sometimes it takes a while. Actually, citing websites is harder than anything else. That's why I'm lazy. I use the databases because, man, they're easy to cite.
That's something else I want to say. If you go to the databases that the library has linked, and you find an article there and you read it, oh, this is great for my paper. You don't actually cite the database. Like you wouldn't say Smith et al. ProQuest database.
Mm-mm.
You cite where that article was actually from.
So I'm trying to think, and yeah, the database doesn't matter. because those articles are available all sorts of places. Let's see, here it is. Journal article from a library, paper library database. There's no way to know whether I actually looked at the item in paper, if a friend gave it to me, or if I found it in a database. But this information is correct so that Professor Humphreys could go find it. So, anything else? You can keep your worksheets. I need the agronomy journals back. You can just drop